alternative requirements for filling vacancies. It's hosted by the Christian Science Monitor.
Hi, David from the Secretary Miguel Cardona. Good to meet you. Hi. Good morning. Good morning, everyone. How are you? Good. Good to meet you. Hi.
Education hire. That's a nice new fluid from Colorado yesterday.
Oh, fantastic.
Okay.
Nice to meet you guys.
Nice to meet you.
Hi. Nice to meet you. I'm Robert. Good to meet you.
Hi, I'm Kristen.
How are you? Good to meet you. Same here. Good morning. Morning. How are you? Good. How are you? Good to meet you. How are you? With the AP? Good to meet you. Same here. Same here.
Okay, Anderson, Washington Post. How are you? Same here.
Chris Quintana, USA Today.
Yes, how are you? Good morning.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Of course, of course. How are you?
Jeremiah Powell, Washington Examiner.
Good to meet you. Do you have breakfast like this every day in places like this? Wow. Beautiful.
All right, so now we're going to get mic'd up.
Please. Thank you. I'm fine, thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you. All right. Are we all ready? C-SPAN, we're good? Okay. Oh, no thanks. Yeah. Okay, good morning. I'm Linda Feldman, Washington Bureau Chief of the Christian Science Monitor. Our guest today is Miguel Cardona, Education Secretary of the United States. This is his first appearance at a Monitor breakfast, so welcome. Secretary Cardona is a lifelong resident of Meriden, Connecticut, where he was a fourth grade teacher. I'm sure that's your toughest job yet. A principal and then assistant superintendent of schools. In 2019, Governor Lamont appointed Dr. Cardona Commissioner of Education for the state of Connecticut, and in March of 2021, he was confirmed as the nation's 12th Secretary of Education. As the father of two school-aged children, he's also seeing the pandemic's impact on education in his daily life, I imagine. And how old are your children?
My son is going to be 18 in about a month. My daughter just turned 16.
Oh, wow. Okay. Anyway, thank you again for doing this. And before I deliver the ground rules, I must note that today's breakfast will last 45 minutes. And so we'll have a hard stop at 9:45 when the Secretary has to leave. Now for the ground rules. We're on the record. Please no live blogging or tweeting. In short, no filing of any kind while the breakfast is underway. And once the session ends at 9:45, there's no embargo. We will email a rough transcript from this breakfast to all reporters here shortly after we conclude. And as many of you know, if you'd like to ask a question, just send me a signal and I'll call on as many as time permits. Now, Secretary Cardona, if you'd like to make some brief opening remarks, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And before I get started, I just want to say thank you to all of you. You have a very important job, especially now as our country recovers from a once-in-a-lifetime pandemic. So thank you for what you do. As Linda mentioned, the title I love most is Dad. I'm a father of two teenagers, which is every day is a new adventure. They're at a critical period in their lives. My son just started college, and my daughter's a junior in high school. My wife is also an educator. She works at college and career. So I started as a fourth grade teacher, so education is something that is near and dear to me and my family. and I recognize the importance of education, good education. I wouldn't be sitting here as secretary if it weren't for teachers that believed in me, that saw potential in me that I didn't see. And it's with that passion that I serve as Secretary of Education. I'm feeling excited at this time of year. 50 million students are going back to school. I always look at the beginning of a new school year as an opportunity for students to think big and think about what they could do, their future, their possibilities, and schools provide that. Going through a hallway on the first day of school to me is like my Super Bowl. There's so much excitement, so much good feeling, so much hope. And it's my responsibility as Secretary of Education to ensure that schools have the tools that they need to be successful, that we raise the bar in education, not only K-12 but higher education, to provide more students opportunities. Look, I've always said our country has almost normalized discrepancies or differences in achievement based on race and place, and my whole career I've been focused on trying to address that, and that will continue to be a passion of mine as long as I'm Secretary of Education. We're at a critical point. The American Rescue Plan provided funding to help reopen our schools, but it's also intended to address what the nation's report card data shared last week, that disparities in achievement have increased due to the pandemic, and math achievement has gone down 7 points. Reading achievement in 9-year-olds have gone down 5 points. I look at that as a call to action to educators to raise the bar on supports using the American Rescue Plan dollars. I'm a K-12 guy before this position, but I'm just as proud of the work that we're doing in higher education to fix a broken system, a system that prevented access for so many students and families because of the cost of college. We're fixing whether it's borrower defense, public service loan forgiveness, income-driven repayment. We're trying to make higher education more accessible to more people. The president's been very bold in education, and it's our country's time to make sure we match the level of urgency that our president has demonstrated in the first year. I'm eager and honored and humbled to serve as secretary and be able to have that task to work with our colleagues across the country to raise the bar in education. Thank you.
All right. Thanks so much. So I'll ask a question or two, and then we'll go around the room. First of all, I want to ask you about the plan for debt forgiveness. You mentioned structural problems in the education system. So if this plan actually goes into effect, and actually I think there's a question around that given the legal challenges that are expected, but even if it goes through, it doesn't address the structural problems that have led to this student debt crisis. So what are the fixes for this, the underlying structural problem?
That's a great question, and a lot of attention over the last couple of weeks has been on the $20,000 that folks are eligible for if they were Pell recipients and make under $125,000. And that's great, but that will not fix the long-term issues, right? So we're just as proud of what we're proposing with the income-driven repayment that will, in essence, cut student loan payments in half for borrowers. We went from 10% of someone's income to 5%. I remember having a conversation with a gentleman whose son was in my school when I was a principal in Meriden, and his son was really bright. And he said, he's not going to college, I just can't afford it. The boy was in 6th grade, and the parent made the decision based on the fact that he knew he couldn't afford college, 6 years later, that his son wasn't going to college. That happens too often across our country. So we're proud of the debt relief. We're just as proud of the work that we're doing to fix a broken system. Let me talk very quickly about what that means. Income-driven repayment, right? I mentioned that a little bit. Public service loan forgiveness. So if you choose a profession where you're serving the public, in many cases you don't do that because it pays like the private sector. You're doing it to make the community better. So we're making sure that the public service loan forgiveness law is implemented correctly. When I became Secretary of Education, there was a 98% denial rate for public servants who paid their loans for 10 years, who served the public for 10 years, and applied for this. 98% were denied. Within a year of our fixing the broken system, we've provided over $10 billion in loan forgiveness just in the public service loan forgiveness program. Over 175,000 people have benefited from it. That's another example. We're fighting to double Pell Grants so that more students who have maybe less resources growing up still have college accessible to them. Higher education accountability. We're going to be working very closely with our higher education institutions to ensure that we're lifting up those universities that provide a good return on investment for students. You know, the days of going to college and leaving $150,000 in debt and then getting a job paying $35,000 a year doesn't cut it. We have to give parents more information, transparency, so they know which institutions they should consider for their children. I could go on all day, but I know we only have 45 minutes.
So I also have to ask you, that, so as far as I know, I'm not an education reporter per se, but as far as I've been able to determine, there haven't been any actual lawsuits. People are talking about lawsuits to challenge the loan forgiveness proposal. And President Biden and Speaker Pelosi themselves had said early on that they couldn't just do this by EO. It had to go. The money would have to come from Congress to do this. And now he's doing it through the HEROES Act. So how is that legal?
You know, we would welcome Congress's action on this because it is an issue that affects all Americans. It's not a red or blue issue. It's an issue that affects so many Americans. I mean, the potential in this country is limitless. However, because of the difficulty to access higher education, we're limiting our country's potential. Under the HEROES Act, I do have the ability to waive certain provisions to ensure that students are not worse off after the pandemic than they were before, borrowers. And I use that authority. I think it's page 673 of the HEROES Act. You know, so we're using that authority. We looked at that very carefully, and we do think that it's the time to make sure that coming out of the pandemic, we provide support to students, just like we did for businesses when businesses were struggling and we needed to provide the PPP funds. You know, we're getting regular, everyday Americans back on their feet so they can buy homes, get married, and move on with life.
And you're confident this will weather court challenges? This is not going to get dragged out in court for years?
You know, we're acting on our authority, and we believe that we have not only the right, but the responsibility to make sure Americans are not worse off after the pandemic than before it.
Okay. Okay, so one more. How do you, we're dealing with a teacher shortage at the moment. And there's been a lot of talk about respect and how teachers are under attack from many directions, whether it's the content of what they're teaching or all the debate around CRT and LGBTQ issues, et cetera, et cetera. How do you address this element that teachers themselves are mentioning about the lack of respect and how they just don't want to deal with this anymore?
Thank you. I remember I was a 21-year-old student teacher in Hartford, Connecticut, and I remember wearing a tie every single day, right? I was like 10 years older than the kids. Walking around, and I had a veteran teacher, pull me aside and said, "I appreciate that you wear a tie. We have to make sure that we look professional." That was a long time ago. Back then and today, we're still fighting for the teaching profession to be looked at as a profession. I say if we're serious about addressing the teacher shortage issue, we must be bold and serious about addressing the teacher respect issue. You know, teachers on average make 33% less than college graduates with similar time and degrees. We adjusted for inflation and all that. Teachers in, I think it's Montana, come in at $32,000. Can you imagine, what can you do with $32,000? And then we know teachers are paying out of their pocket for materials for students. We have to address this, and we have to be bold about it. We have to be honest that if we're serious about investing in our schools and in our education system, we must make sure we're treating educators like professionals that they are.
So how do you encourage respect? How do you create that environment? You
know, in education, especially, I'm an elementary guy.
Right.
Everything has an acronym to it, or something catchy. So ABCs.
Okay.
All right. A stands for agency. Make sure teachers feel that they're treated like professionals and they can act as professionals. They've gotten training for this. Many of them have gone to college for 6 to 8 years to master their craft. So agency, some autonomy of how they meet students' needs. B, better working conditions. All right. There are schools in this country today that have a ratio of over 700 to 1 school counselors. Think about that.
Yeah.
Think about what does that mean for a first-generation college student that wants to go to college, doesn't know how, parents may not be able to help them. They're one of 700 on the school counselors. So if we're not providing better working conditions by ensuring that there's adequate support for the classroom teacher to provide holistic support for the students, then we're kidding ourselves. Better working condition also means that we revisit normalizing that teachers could work in classrooms that are 95 degrees all day with a class of 27 students. Working condition means that when we receive our students back after a pandemic, many of them, over 150,000 students having lost a parent or caregiver due to the pandemic, we treat them like professionals by providing professional learning opportunities on how to deal with trauma. So better professional learning opportunities for teachers, better career pathways. So A is agency, B is better working conditions, and C, competitive salaries. That's the bottom line. Look, we want to recruit students. We have to make sure that they're not thinking, well, if I become a teacher, I have to drive Uber on the weekends, or I have to waitress on the weekends to make ends meet. That's unacceptable. And that's a difficult topic because 80% of the budgets across the country in school systems are salaries. But if we're serious about lifting the profession, if we're serious about lifting education, we must invest in our educators. Investing in our educators is an investment in our students.
Okay. John Gizzi from Newsmax.
Thank you, Linda. And
Hey,
Mr.
John.
Secretary, I'm delighted to know we grew up a half hour from each
Really?
other. Newington.
Oh, great.
Born in Hartford.
Oh, wow.
New York,
Wow.
But it's great. I remember I've been to Meriden many
Yeah,
times.
yeah.
But anyway, I have a two-parter. First of all, the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, which is a nonpartisan group dedicated to fiscal responsibility, did the numbers on the student loan program, and they said essentially it'll be back where it was by 2028, 1.6 trillion, and then adjusted for inflation, it will be even more by 2031, definitely higher than where it is. I'm sure you've heard this commentary before. What do you think of that?
Thank you, John. Look, this decision to provide debt relief is one strategy out of many. I highlighted earlier, the worst thing that could happen is for us to provide debt relief and be in the same position 5 years from now. So if we don't stop the bleeding, we're going to be in the same position we're in. We're eager to fix the broken system. Public service loan forgiveness, income-driven repayment, ensuring a better return on investment with colleges. You know, college costs have ballooned. We have to make sure we're working with higher education institutions to hold them accountable for a good return on investment. We've increased the college scorecard attributes, meaning parents will know more about graduation rates and gainful employment rates of students that go to those schools. So you're absolutely right, John. If we think that the loan forgiveness alone will help fix the root cause of the issue, that's short-sighted. We are working really hard on those processes that got us to where we are, fixing the broken system. Now, specifically with this recent announcement from the president, the president in the Inflation Reduction Act has reduced the deficit by $300 billion, and it's projected that $1.7 billion will be reduced this year alone. So $1.7 trillion. So there are efforts to reduce the deficit by the president, and we do believe that debt relief, which is what Americans need right now. I talked to a teacher recently who said, "This is going to allow me now to use the funds that I was going to use to pay my loans to help my daughter go to college." It's helping everyday Americans. So the focus is not on only the debt relief, but I think more important, but it's not as flashy, I guess, is fixing a broken system through policy like the income-driven repayment.
And just as a quick follow-up.
Sure.
Polls showed at about the time the president made his decision that his numbers were dropping among young people. Was that a factor in his decision at all on forgiving debt relief?
Absolutely not. We've been discussing this, the details of this. I know many of you have asked me, hey, any news today? And unfortunately, I sound like a broken record. I don't have any breaking news today on this, but we've been discussing this for many months. But, you know, the president hasn't been sitting idle. I do want to say, I was having a conversation with someone yesterday. You know, within a couple of months of him taking office, the American Rescue Plan was passed, which is, you know, unprecedented funds toward education. We have the bipartisan infrastructure bill that was passed. We have the PACT Act. We have the Inflation Reduction Act. Now the debt, so it's not like there was nothing else going on. This president has been very busy, and I say this is a season of substance, not sensationalism. We're getting things done. The debt relief package was one that the ongoing conversation with the White House and our department, and we're really proud of where we came out. We knew debt relief was going to be a part of it. The president campaigned on 10. We ended up with 20,000 for those who are eligible for Pell to address achievement disparities. But we're also proud of the income-driven repayment process that, as I said before, is not as flashy, but has generational impact. So I think the timing has to do more with the negotiations that we've had about how best to help American people.
All right, I'm Colin Binkley from the AP to your left.
Okay. Hi.
Hey, good morning. I also have a question about the one-time debt cancellation. So we know that borrowers who made payments during the payment pause can request refunds from their servicers. My question is whether those refunds are eligible for the one-time debt relief, assuming the underlying loans are also eligible.
Yes, thank you, Colin, for that question. We've gotten those questions, and let me just put it out there early. We are planning to share information as soon as possible, and we're asking folks to visit studentaid.gov/debt relief. And part of the conversations that we're having now is how to, in effect, provide loan cancellation, loan debt relief to those who have made payments during the pandemic. So that is something that we're seeking to do, and more information about where we go with that would be found on studentaid.gov/debt relief.
Just as a follow-up, if you're a borrower in that situation, you're considering that, what's your advice right now? Should you wait until there's further guidance on?
Yeah, definitely. And what I would say is go to studentaid.gov/debt relief and register there for an automated email. So what we're doing is we have over 3 million already in the last 2 weeks. Go in, sign up, you'll receive, as soon as we put something out, you'll automatically get it. So we're trying to make it easy. I think I want to share with all of you too, part of fixing the broken system is making sure that when you go onto our websites, you're getting answers right away. There's not a lot of bureaucracy, not a lot of red tape. We felt that a lot of people that were going for the public service loan forgiveness just gave up. The process was too difficult. We're trying to simplify the process so that folks are not stressed out with the process of getting debt relief. And more information will come out, studentaid.gov/debt relief. They can sign up for an email there.
All right, Nick Anderson from the Washington Post.
Hi, Nick.
Hi, thanks so much for the time. So last month you made a speech in which you talked a little bit about college rankings. And you talked about how there's this sort of chase for prestige in the ranking system, and you said, quote, that system of ranking is a joke. And I was struck by that because it's a pretty pointed comment. What drove you to sort of laser in on that particular topic in higher education, on sort of prestige-based rankings? What was getting under your skin about that?
Thanks for the question. There are millions of students out there with tremendous potential, many of whom are the first in their family to go to college, who won't even be looked at by some of these universities. I believe we have a system that rewards exclusionary practice. I'm interested in developing and evolving our system of higher education to promote and reward inclusionary practices. I don't have to tell you that when students graduate, we still have disparities in achievement. The NAEP data, the one that I referred to earlier, the Nation's Report Card, is a symptom of the fact that in our K-12 systems, race and place still serve as determinants of success, sadly, almost predictors. You add the pandemic, that exacerbated disparities. And unfortunately for many of these students, they don't have access to some of our higher education institutions. What I want to do is provide a spotlight on those universities that go the extra mile to meet those students where they are, provide them the holistic support that they need, and give them opportunities to achieve the American dream. We brought 40 universities to the Department of Education, something that hadn't been done before. We brought those presidents in, we gave them time in conference rooms like this one to talk about what they're doing and how they're using American Rescue Plan dollars, but how their vision of what higher education can be is more inclusive. Every student in this country deserves an opportunity to reach their potential.
Quick follow-up. Your attack on the sort of prestige-based rankings did not really mention a prestige-based ranking. Did you have in mind U.S. News? Was that part of your thinking?
Thank you for the pointed question. Look, that and others, in my opinion, prioritize prestige and exclusivity. We are very serious about bringing attention to and providing support for those universities that take students that are struggling right now and give them an opportunity to succeed. In my visits across the country, I think I visited like 33, 34 states already. I went to a university, I think it was Las Vegas, where it was a community college that had a student that was talking to me, sitting right next to me, was talking to me about the programming that they're in, that they're close to graduation. It came out later in the conversation, just naturally, that this person was homeless. And this person was close to getting a degree. The university provided some support for housing. This person is going to be very successful because the university provided the supports needed. I want to acknowledge that. I want to lift that. I want to make sure more Americans have access to higher education and to career pathways for success.
Okay, I'm Sally Persons from Fox.
Hi, Sally.
Mr. Secretary, I have a K through 12 question. So you talked a little bit in your remarks about working conditions in some of these schools, and we've seen in the first week of school a lot of these schools close early or release because they don't have sufficient HVAC systems. But the American Rescue Plan and subsequent packages have included money for this. Are you concerned that that money is not being well spent? I know House Republicans sent your agency a letter asking for a breakdown of how this money is being spent in the districts.
Thanks for that question. You know, when I was in Connecticut, I was a commissioner of ed there, and you know, schools shut down right away, and then the day after, our goal was to reopen them safely. And I saw in Connecticut the disparities between some districts and others. And then when I became Secretary of Education, it was like really in my face. I traveled a lot the first several months. I visited Philadelphia, and I remember talking to the superintendent of Philadelphia and visiting the schools, and they weren't opening when other neighboring communities that had more resources were. And it was because of deferred maintenance. Now, this is a topic you might hear about a lot now, but for decades, school systems deferred maintenance on their air circulation. So the air quality was poor, and then when you add a pandemic that's airborne, there was a lot of fear from parents. They're not sending their kids back. So what I found was in urban settings or in settings that where the buildings were old, and those buildings in Philly were old, they weren't opening up. So absolutely, I believe that air quality and airflow and the working conditions of classrooms that are not 90 degrees to learn, it's a prerequisite to successful learning and teaching. Now, in terms of the backup, we know supply chain issues have impacted the ability for schools to get the materials, and they're on back order. As a matter of fact, a lot of superintendents have shared with us at the department, look, I want to get it, but I'm waiting on these supplies, but this is the priority for me. And if you look at the Future Ed study that was independent of us, the breakdown, I believe, is almost 30% is going to go toward infrastructure of schools to make sure the school environment is safe for learning, another 30% to catch kids up, and 30 roughly on staffing and mental health issues. So I do believe the money is being spent. I know the money is being spent appropriately. I've seen examples of it when I visited. There were more students in summer school this summer than any time in our country's history because of the American Rescue Plan. There are more after-school programs. I visited a program in Georgia. 100 community-based organizations, 100, were brought in to the fold with the school system's efforts to provide summer and after-school programming. That would never have happened if it weren't for the American Rescue Plan. So I think, quite frankly, the headlines we'd be talking about now is which colleges are closing and which schools are not open yet because they don't have funding. The American Rescue Plan is the reason why we're talking about kids going to school smiling and having the ability to go in full-time in person. So I do believe the money is being used adequately, and I would welcome questions from my colleagues on the Hill to show them in their districts, even though they didn't vote for it, in their districts how the money is being used.
Jeremiah Poff from Washington Examiner.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I want to shift to a topic that hasn't been touched on yet, Title IX. You guys have obviously put forth a pretty substantial revision to the regulation for that. So my question is two parts. There's been a ton of comments that have been submitted, and I'm wondering if there's been any thought to maybe extending the comment period. And then secondly, I want to know if you'd be able to talk a little bit about why you guys chose to separate the sports issue from the main Title IX rule, and if there's a timeline on when we should expect the proposal from
Right. Over 200, 300,000 comments, which shows that this is an area, which shows, number one, how important it is for us to have public comment and listen to what folks are saying. And for us, the Title IX rules reflect the value that every child belongs. Every child's education matters, and it's our responsibility to provide inclusive environments in all of our schools. Like I was mentioning to him around higher education, inclusivity is something that we should not even question. All students belong. All students should be seen. In terms of the comment period, extending it, we're going to process through those, and I think at this point it's important that we communicate what we believe the rules should be based on the comments and based on our thoughts at the department. And in terms of the separation, this topic of athletics is one that, in my opinion, does require another round of input specific to athletics. We hear daily the different opinions that people have, and we want to make sure we give it its time for people to comment just specifically on that. So we want to move quickly on that. We recognize that that's an important issue, but we also recognize that rushing through something that's so important could create a situation where people are not feeling heard or feel like they're not given an opportunity to speak.
Okay. Ariana Figueroa from States News Service.
Hi, Ariana.
I kind of want to go back to the structural issues with student loans. It seems like a lot of the policy ideas that you all have are still after the fact. So I'm curious, what are some tools that the Department of Education can use to actually address, the cost of high tuition for these universities? Because a lot of them, are tax exempt because of their education status. They don't pay taxes on lots of donations from alumni. So what can the department do?
Yeah, thank you for that question. One thing that I learned, Ariana, when we were reopening schools in the height of a pandemic in a state where we had, I think, 172 districts that had a level of autonomy that, I couldn't, as commissioner, say, this is what you're going to do. And then the pandemic hit different places differently. Connecticut's small, but some places were hit harder. So what we had to do is bring to the table those who were making decisions at the local level, create a shared set of values, and then from there drive the strategies. So it is my intention to bring college presidents to the table, to bring the associations that govern them or that represent them to the table. I'm not foolish to think that the best ideas come from Washington, D.C. But at the end of the day, we all want our students to succeed. We all want a high return on investment. And it's our responsibility to bring folks together to talk about, have those difficult conversations. And say, how are we providing a good return on investment? And then the Department of Education's role is to make sure that we're lifting up those institutions that are doing it and calling out those that are not a good don't provide good value for students and families. We plan on working with them, but we also plan on using whatever leverage we can, like the college scorecard, like our funding opportunities to provide support and funding for those institutions that we believe are providing an inclusive environment, but also providing a good return on investment. And then it may be that with those universities and colleges, we come up with different practices that we'll work with our partners on the Hill to try to ensure that throughout the country, our universities are accessible to all students.
All right, Noah Robertson from the Monitor.
Thank you for doing this.
Of course.
You mentioned right there the relevant parties, stakeholders involved in fixing the system, and earlier you talked about the student loan provisions around public service, the income-driven repayment, and then lowering red tape. I'm wondering what else, as you see it, needs to be done to fix this system, and then will that require congressional action, and what's the likelihood of that actually happening?
Sure. No, thank you. Look, we got into education to provide opportunities for students, and I haven't met a college president in my visits, whether it was an HBCU, a traditional college, a community college, a tribal college, an HSI, where the leadership doesn't believe that. What we need to do is kind of re-examine where we are and how we've gotten to this mess, to this broken system, where it further exacerbates the haves and the have-nots. And we have to identify which practices are leading to a poor return on investment, leading to high debt, low income, and we have to call that out. So I'm meeting later this week with some of the folks at the department to engage in conversations and a strategy on how we're going to work with our partners in the higher ed space to look at these issues differently. So, as I said before, I don't come to the table with a plan and ask people to sign the plan. I want different stakeholders' fingerprints on the plan, so it's our plan. And I think everybody sees the problem, and we're willing to now address it, call it what it is. Look, there's been more money in education in the last year and a half than in the over 2 decades that I've been in education. So the support is there, the belief is there that education is the best strategy to lift this country. But now we need to make sure that with support becomes accountability. How are we using the money, and how are we going to make sure we're not in the same mess we're in now? Because this debt relief thing is a one-time thing. We want to fix the root of the issue so we're not there again. That's the best way to serve the American people.
Okay, so we have 5 minutes until 9:45, and I know you want to make closing remarks, but I also have other people.
Sure.
So can we take, have a little...
Like a rapid fire,
we'll have a lightning round. So David Lerman from CQ Roll Call, Chris Quintana from USA Today, and Christina Samuels from Hechinger Report. So, David, why don't you kick us off?
Okay, thanks.
Quickly.
Real quick.
Sure.
I know there's been pushback on this loan forgiveness idea. So I was just wondering if you could address the fairness aspect of it. Because there are students that have already paid off their student loans. What do you say to them? Say, look, I had to pay mine. Why do these people now get slate wiped clean?
Sure. So look, David, the pandemic impacted all of us, some more than others. The intent of this debt relief is to make sure borrowers are not worse off after the pandemic than they were before. But to that person that paid off their loan, having their neighbor not go into default helps the local economy. We know defaults were skyrocketing, and we were expecting it to skyrocket even more. It helps the local economy, and in my opinion, it's un-American to see your neighbor do well. We're not complaining that businesses weren't forced to shut their doors, and we provided support for businesses through PPP, and we're thrilled we did that because a lot of these businesses that are still open now would not have been open had it not been for that. So we invested in businesses, now we're investing in Americans to make sure they get back on their feet and move on with their lives.
Okay, Chris?
Hi, thank you for doing this. I just had a question about the PSLF waiver. It's set to end in October. Mm-hmm. The extension on the payment pause is set to go through the end of the year. A group of lawmakers had recently wrote to the department asking for an extension on the waiver. I'm just trying to get a sense of if that is in play, and as a part of that, announcements regarding the suspension have come about a month or so in advance of it, and so I was wondering when we might see answers about that.
Sure. The public service loan forgiveness is a program, as I said before, that was broken pretty badly. It was embarrassing. 98% of the people were denied. We're to 175,000 people getting benefit, over $10 billion in loan forgiveness, based on what Congress acted on in 2007. The waiver is a limited waiver, October 31st. We want folks to sign up, even if they're not sure if they qualify for it. So we're really pushing that. In terms of an extension, we're not announcing an extension. We're right now focused on trying to get as many people on. We obviously are working really hard to make sure we're providing as much benefit to the folks that qualify for it. And that's why I take every opportunity to promote public service loan forgiveness, October 31st deadline. So anything you can do to publish that will be great.
Christina Samuels at Hechinger Report.
Hi, thank you. This is a question that hasn't been raised yet. School segregation.
Yeah.
This is something that we know is increasing across the country. It's something that you've dealt with in your prior role.
Right.
There's a lawsuit in New Jersey related to school integration. I'm wondering what, if anything, the administration might be planning to do to help support schools or districts that might be wanting to start integration policies in their own schools.
Yeah, I do have a lot of experience with that in Connecticut, and we in Connecticut really use the magnet school model to attract different students from different communities. And I know the president's budget also included funding to help support efforts to integrate schools. Look, it's sad that we're discussing this far out after legislation on desegregation. But the reality is it requires not just strategies from the Department of Education, but a willingness of communities to see the benefit of diversity, to make sure that, like for me, my child's experience in school was better because they were able to experience learning with people that were totally different from them. That's a skill. It's almost a skill that we want all of our children to have, to learn how to learn with people that are totally different than them, so that when they graduate and they move on, look, we're looking at a global economy, right? We do support efforts. We will continue to highlight efforts of successful desegregation and better integration. We see models across the country. States control the education, so we see models that work. We lift those up. At the federal level, we support through grants and technical assistance where we can. But I think the more important thing is that we share the value that diversity is what makes our country unique and better, and we have to continue to push that throughout our country.
All right. Well, we're just about at time.
Did everyone get a chance?
We had a couple more, but I don't know.
Yeah,
I promised your folks I'd get.
I know, but I want to.
You want to keep going?
They came here.
Quickly.
Just a couple more, please.
Okay, Kim Campbell from the Monitor to your right, and then Mariah from Washington Post across the table.
Okay.
Thanks so, Kim. Here again.
Of course.
A couple of K-12. I want to go back to that. In terms of the money that's being used to help, say, the teacher preparation, pipeline, that's money that schools have now from these initiatives. Mm-hmm. But how is it going to be sustainable when that money is no longer there?
Yeah, and I appreciate that question. And for the higher ed, my response to this is going to be similar to how do we address the issue in higher ed of ballooning costs. Look, federal spending on education makes up about 10% of education funding total, right? So there's 90%. My challenge is to the other 90% match the president's urgency. Match the president's urgency. If we go back to the funding that was there in March 2020, we should not expect different results. So specifically to the teacher pipeline programs, for example. I'm visiting Tennessee next week as part of the back to school tour. I'm excited about that. Tennessee has a tremendous apprenticeship program, a grow your own program that's embedded throughout the state, where it's an apprenticeship, much like an apprenticeship for a trade. They're looking at solutions, viable solutions that are long term. There has to be an investment in those programs by states. There has to be an investment. Let's not forget what happened with Omicron when schools shut down, not because of COVID, but because people were quarantining because they were close contacts. We can't forget the impact that has on a community if our schools have to close because we don't have enough teachers. So my push is not only to make sure we're using the federal funds to create programs, but also to elevate the urgency at state and local governments on ongoing funding on those issues that are so important. Same thing with higher education. We're creating charged at the Department of Education to assess spending rates in higher education by state governments over the last 10 years. We're looking at it longitudinally. There are some states that have increased funding, which helped keep the costs lower, and there are states where the funding has gone down drastically for higher education, which results in higher tuition. So we're looking at that to discuss how we can get our colleague governors and county leaders at the table talking about the urgency in education. Match the president's urgency around education funding and education policy. That's how we're going to get ahead.
So I want to shift gears really quickly to something else.
Do we have time? Because I want Mariah to get one in too.
Definitely.
Yeah, let's get to Mariah.
Okay, sorry, Kate.
Sorry.
Okay, Mariah from the Washington Post.
Hi, Mariah.
Hi, thank you so much for doing this again. I'm curious to know what your thoughts are on what some states are doing to try and fill these teacher vacancies, which is using emergency certification, lowering standards in some cases, or creating alternative pathways. In Florida, for example, they did sort of what you were talking about, which is raise compensation, but they've also created a new pathway where veterans with some college education can now become teachers once they spend they get provisional licenses once they spend 2 years underneath like an actual certified teacher, but they're not requiring college degrees. In Oklahoma, you don't need any kind of teacher preparation in order to become an emergency certified teacher, and they're relying increasingly on that. I'm curious to know what your thoughts are on those kinds of alternative pathways.
Yeah, thank you, Mariah. Look, I started earlier saying as a fourth grade teacher I was fighting to make sure teaching is looked at as a profession. The moment we start lowering standards to get in, we're again doubling down on the disrespect to the profession. But look, I'm all for veterans becoming teachers. In Connecticut, we had a program called Troops to Teachers. We wanted it. Oh my goodness, they bring a skill set. But let's remember, when the nation's report card is showing that our students have dropped drastically, to provide educators who are not qualified or trained in the pedagogy of teaching is a slap in the face to the profession. What we need to do, I think Florida's 45th out of 50 in livable wages. What we need to do is address the fact that professionals are leaving the profession, that people are not selecting education. Let's make sure we have, again, agency, better working conditions, competitive salary, and you'll see that issue go away. We'll raise the bar. Our kids need more, not less. So I do recognize, I was commissioner and we had shortage areas. I was a district leader. We had shortage areas. We have to be creative. We have to create pipeline programs. We have to look at our current students as future teachers and give them a pathway in high school. We have to take our para-educators who've worked extremely hard meeting the needs of our students, making $12 an hour, and say, listen, I'm going to provide some funding, American Rescue Plan funding now because we're in a crisis, for you to go on and get your degree. And then you're going to come back and you're going to get a job here. And we need to look at the American Rescue Plan dollars to bring in retired teachers without any penalty of retirement benefits. These are some of the creative things that we're promoting. We worked with Treasury to make these things possible. There are solutions out there. Lowering standards is not one of them. We need to raise the bar. Thank you.
All right. Did you want to make closing?
I just want to say thank you again. Look, I'm gonna end it with what I started. Your role is critically important. I appreciate what you do. I appreciate the time you took to be here. I feel very optimistic about education moving forward. The pandemic sharpened our swords for the real fight ahead, which is addressing inequities, raising the bar in education. If we can reopen schools in the height of a pandemic, ensuring safety, we can address teacher shortage issues. We can address lagging achievement. We can address disparities that have increased. We can address this broken higher education system. I'm confident that if we put the urgency that we had over the last 2 years to get our schools open on the issues of today, and we work with the American people, we listen to all sides of the issues, we can provide a better education system than we've ever had. I'm confident of that. The president came in. He doesn't call himself an education president, but look at the policy, look at the movement in funding for education. It's never happened before. I'm telling states and districts, let's match the level of urgency, let's be innovative, and let's make it better than it was in March 2020. That should not be our goal, to go back to what it was then. We'd be failing our kids if we do that. This is an opportunity for us to really reimagine education. We have the resources, we should have the urgency, and working together, we're going to get it done. Thank you, everyone.
All right.
All right.
Thank you so much, and I hope you'll come back.
I definitely will. Thank you.
Excellent. All right. See, don't forget to take off your mic.
Can't leave with a hot mic, right? Good to meet you all. Thank you. Take care. Take care. Enjoy your breakfast. Thank you.